Hi everyone, welcome to my episode 2 of Energy Talk. So in this episode, we're going to have a very interesting individual, Mr. David Liu, who's going to talk about energy transition, the reality check in Malaysia. So that's very interesting. I had a lot of fun engaging this section with him, where he's going to talk about on an overview of where we can see energy transition in terms of macro shock, domestic shock, and also talent shock. So he's going to cover on a very big scale of this topic. And then he's going to talk about it's green, really green in terms of the energy transition and also a bit of the ESG reporting. So you can get a lot of valuable knowledge and inputs because he is very passionate individual in this energy transition space and he has a lot of experience and knowledge transfer and technology transfer experience and also talks a bit of how this ecosystem of startups actually plays a role in this energy transition as well. So tune in and watch the video and let me know if you would like to know more about this content. And then we can further engage with Mr. David Liu for another part 2. When you say Jakarta was very local in serving their startups, right? Can you give some examples just to have?
Look at Gojek, look at Bulapapak, look at all of the unicorns that they have, right?
I think the LCA, the TEA is so important, and then the end life disposable. I think
Nobody takes it. But and this I find very
that's really nice because David, I can totally relate when you talk about how green is green, right? When you're talking about solar, I personally have done some research on solar panels, and I've developed my
the question that my mentor in this space that has trained me to ask, which I'll ask you again, is why do you have a need to report? So hi Visha, thanks for having me on. I'm David Liu from TropBio Research Sdn Bhd. It's actually a private research company that started in 1995 actually by Tan Sri Saleh, who is still with the company and he's my mentor and also principal of the company as well. Initially, when we started, we are a plant tissue culture a company that dealt in biotech. We're the first private biotech company in Malaysia, actually. It was registered with Bionexus. And now we've actually pivoted and we are supporting researchers in their journey into entrepreneurship and business in startups. Yes. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about, as part of your series on energy transition, I want to talk a little bit about the reality check that I think Malaysia needs, and especially for researchers and startups who are getting into this space, which is a very exciting space. But I think we need to put some context around it so that we have a broader perspective on this very large industry. And I want to break it up into three areas. Firstly, just to talk about the different shocks that we are going through, the macro shocks, the domestic shocks that we have in Asia or Southeast Asia, and a bit about the talent shocks. I think that will kind of put it into perspective, and then really jump into what I like to say is how green is green, and really talk about the sector, right? And lastly, I want to talk about a very hot topic, which is ESG reporting, right? Everyone talks about ESG reporting, but no one knows what is ESG reporting. Maybe just shed some of my own personal research and my own personal insights into this space. And then afterwards, I can take any questions that you have. Yeah. So I think firstly, yeah,
Just before we
go.
start, right, I just want to ask a bit more on your experience, right? Your personal experience when you say you're in your current company, and now that you're talking, I know you have lots of experience in this area, right? But in your personal experience, how long you've been engaging with energy transition itself? I mean, I know it's been a recent years of the hype, the topic, but I'm sure you've been involved way before of the hype and everything. So how long was this process?
I think from my own personal research as well in this space, it has been almost 5 years already.
Okay.
Um, and and, I've had a personal interest in this because the research that we see happening overseas in Europe, in US, and all is very exciting. And I think if you think back before COVID, 4 5 years was also the time when Malaysia was kind of getting very excited about this space. We had all
Yes.
these programs with the National Graphene Plan. I don't know if you remember that sometime back. We don't hear that much anymore, but yeah, it was there was a lot of hype around it, a very exciting space for researchers, especially in Malaysia, because we have a lot of researchers in this space, and this could create a lot of high skilled jobs as well, and that's why I was interested to look into it. So about 4 years plus, 4 5 years plus, yes.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So now that you're talking about your few topics that you listed out earlier, right? So can you like probably define very briefly on your top subtopics that you were defining just now? Your micro.
Yeah. So if we talk about macro shocks, of course, the big one is the one that the whole world went through, which was the pandemic, and we came out of that. And again, a lot of people say that's the worst pandemic we've had since the 19th century Spanish flu, right? And while the whole world was coping with that, we've also had a lot of global geopolitical issues, predominantly between China and the United States. But we've also now had wars that have been erupting as well, overseas during the same time frame. You think about it. So from a macro shock perspective, pandemic was one of the biggest things that affected everyone. But now we've got these foreign wars happening, these geopolitical stresses happening, and the geopolitics of even like China and US has direct and indirect effects to Asia as well. Positively for Malaysia, we benefited from it because we see a higher increase in our foreign trade that's going up. We see our increase in our oil production and in supply to China as well as one of the largest supply chain partners as well. So there is a ripple effect from macro shocks that happen. So that's predominantly, I would say, this is something that we have to take into context. We can't take it in isolation when we're looking at everything that's happening, right? I mean, we could say it's happening, far away from us, but there are issues that ripple back. The war between Russia and that's happening now had a direct impact on the cost of raw materials for food, right? Food
Yes.
was impacted, food security was impacted. And you'll see this happening with any global macro shocks that happen. So I want to emphasize that even though we are going through it, our generation is facing something that the generation before us didn't have to face, in multiple massive macro shocks that has happened in a very short span of time. So that's the essence of the macro side of it. Then domestic shocks that we see then happening is that you see a lot of things happening with different regime changes. When you think about Thailand and you think about Myanmar, you think about what's also happening now with Indonesia, literally moving their capital, right? Their entire capital. And we don't have to go so far. I mean, look at what happened at home in Malaysia, right? We've had, three or four government changes in such a short time frame. So these are domestic shocks that happen. It affects our economy, it affects businesses, it affects how company's plan. It affects how you actually align yourselves to regional and global paradigm shifts. And we are all going through that at the same time, right? At the same time, we're trying to cope with international shocks. Yeah. Maybe round off the first part is the talent shocks, right?
Mm-mm.
Putting it into perspective of, I think you work with a lot of researchers as well. I work with researchers as well. Putting into perspective of entrepreneurs, we're in our generation is in a very interesting time because if you think about it, right, if you start a startup, right, and you're hiring people who have never been in startups before, right? There's a high chance you're hiring someone who has never been in a startup environment. So you're hiring someone who's coming from the old way of working, the old way of being an employee, that doesn't have a mindset that is kind of tuned towards the startup industry, and that's very important. So when I talk about talent shocks, I try to remind people, I try to remind researchers that it's a very unique position we're in because we are in a industry that is so nascent to us. We're trying to replicate foreign models like the Silicon Valley of US and all the other guys who've had many years ahead of us in maturity. But we are hiring people who do not have the experience. As if I'm in San Francisco, I could literally just hire people who have only worked in startups before, right? And they will have a track record working in startups. In Malaysia, it's a bit different. If I start a tech, like I have a team now that's starting a new tech company. Even though I'm guiding them and mentoring them, uh, I know as well as they know that they're going to be hiring people who have expertise in the area but have not worked in the tech startup environment. So and a lot of researchers and a lot of first time founders, right, have this very romanticized version of what a startup is. Because they watch a lot of Shark Tank, or they watch a lot of you know um, maybe Silicon Valley movies, or dramas and all of that, and or maybe they watch Y Combinator and see how they have the experience, and they kind of shape what their thought is. In fact, and many times it's sad to say this, even our government gets it wrong when they talk about startups in Malaysia, because they can't try to emulate the United States, right? And I think we've got to put it into context, like how I love the way Indonesia startups are extremely big in numbers because they have the numbers, so they have a big impact in terms of dollar value and market share. But they're very local in their thinking in terms of serving their people, and I think that's the kind of mindset that we need to have in terms of even building this ecosystem which we call startups in Malaysia. Instead of having big targets like we want to have X number of unicorns, I think that shouldn't even come up in a conversation. Yeah.
When
So
you say
that's
Jakarta, sorry, when you say Jakarta was very local in serving their startups, right? Can you
yeah.
give some examples just to
Yeah,
have
I
a better?
mean, look at Gojek, look at Bulak Papek, look at all of the unicorns that they have, right? You will notice that they are unicorns fundamentally for economic reasons, right? They have a large base. They don't really need to support it. They just need to support their local economy, and they can reach the Western standards of what's a unicorn, right? Which is a 1 million turnover company, right? So I think they realize that very quickly. Startups in China does the same thing as well. If they just focus on supplying to their own numbers, because they are large, right? Indian startups does the same thing as well because they have large numbers, right? We don't have those numbers, and that's what we need to start thinking. We can't think like, okay, I'm only going to serve Malaysians, because you won't be able to achieve good valuations. You won't attract good investors because you don't have the numbers. But if we start thinking as a region, we start realizing that we are kind of like in the center of a growing ASEAN economy, then that changes the game for us. And I think that's the sweet spot we keep missing out, because we're kind of like only Malaysians, or we really want to go global and like think we're a Silicon Valley kind of a copy, right? And we're never anywhere then after that. So yeah, that's what I think. I mean, yeah, you can just have a look at just Google some of the top unicorns in Indonesia. You'll see they're extremely local. They solve local issues, local problems that they actually require, and I think that's what make them actually move a lot faster. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
yeah, so I want to kind of diverge and jump into a topic that gets a lot of weird looks normally when I speak about this, because I think a lot of people don't realize how green is green. Okay, we have a lot of activism in the space for climate change, and activism is all about, let's stop consuming, let's kind of go green, right? So I want to talk a little bit about go green, and I just wonder sometimes how much people actually know about how green some of our current renewable energy technologies are. And when I say that, I mean wind farms, I mean solar, I mean EV. I mean, these are the three biggest. Well, these are the only that we have. If you leave out all the other geothermal, nuclear, and all of that, right? So let's just leave all that out. Let's talk about a tree, which is the tree that's available today when we talk about renewable energy. Now, when you talk about wind farms, there are components that go into building a wind farm, right? So you have rare earth materials, you have rare earth elements that are in a wind farm. And if you think of unit economics, right? If you think about it from a perspective of unit economics, to build one wind farm, you need 220 tons of coal.
Okay.
More than 220 tons of coal is required to produce a wind farm. Other facts that are available: the magnet generation, which is part of the wind farm. You have steel that is required for the turbines itself. Apart from even the blades itself is made out of aluminium, right? The magnet generation, you have iron, boron, you've got all these other, there's about four different elements there. The battery energy storage that's required for wind farms itself is similar to the EVs, which is lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, and carbon rare earths, right? Then you've got corrosion protection as well for the wind farms, which is also like zinc and all these long words that can't be pronounced unless you have a major in it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And a lot of copper. All wiring is basically copper. So I mean, and I'm not even talking about the current issues that Europe has with wind farms. We don't have this issue because we don't have big wind farms everywhere. But even in Europe, they're having issues with birds getting caught in it, functioning wind farms. I don't even know what's the lifespan of a wind farm, but I know that it's not living up to its lifespan. So there's maintenance cost issues. I'm not talking about all of that. I'm just talking about how green is green, which is look at how many elements are part of a wind farm, which we call green today, right? Um, the next thing, which is solar panels, which I'm very passionate about this because when at some stage a few years ago, the government had this big direction of putting solar panels on every rooftop and all that. I was not excited about that. Now, the reason I'm not excited about that is because you have got many rare earth element materials that are in a solar panel. From when you talk about cadmium, beryllium, germanium, all the neums basically are in the solar panels. And you'll be surprised that a lot of this has years and years of research that when it's at its end of life, right? Like cadmium, for example, these are all carcinogenic materials. And when it's
Yes.
put at landfills, and let me repeat that again, when it's put at landfills at its end of life, it leaches into the waterways and is actually cancerous. And
Ah,
so what happens is that, I give you one statistic from the IRENA Institute that actually said by 2050 we'll have 80 million metric tons of solar panels in landfills.
yeah, yeah.
Now,
Mm,
these are things that I feel that we should know about and think about when we're making large scale directives to say let's increase shift gears and go full on into solar panels and put it on every rooftop, because we're doing something now that's going to affect our next generation. We may not see the impacts of this, but it will affect the next generation. And again, coming back to my theme of how green is green, right? You got to think about this from that perspective. Why aren't we working on technology that is looking at the best way to actually store solar panels at the end of life? Solar panels, all e-waste, right? We're talking about lithium batteries, we're talking about solar panels. That should go into a high-tech facility, which doesn't exist today. That should go into a high-tech facility that gets to extract whatever that we could extract back into the economy, and what can't be extracted should be disposed of in a safe and efficient manner. But instead of us, pulling our money together with different states or different countries to develop, say, a high tech facility, whether it takes even 5 years of R&D to even come up with those kind of technologies, we're going full ahead and investing billions of dollars into technology that is not very green if you think about it, right? The other thing is you can pull up research on how long does a solar panel live. Uh, this we know, right? They say it should last 20 years, correct?
Think.
I saw a study in Singapore that said on average, the solar panels that we are getting today, let me emphasize today because technology changes all the time. But the
Yeah.
technology that we have today, on average, solar panels does not even last 10 years.
Mm.
Now,
So,
have have we included this cost disparity into the levelized cost of energy?
mm, the LCA, yeah.
Yeah, if we say the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy today makes solar panels efficient for us to use it, we have to think about it from a full life cycle analysis, right? Because if we didn't take damage, maintenance, and end of life into consideration in the cost, then solar is not really compatible with
Well,
our current energy.
yeah, I get where you're
Yeah.
coming from. I think the LCA, the TEA is so important, and then the end life disposable. Yeah, I think.
No, nobody takes it. But and this I find very weird because this is something we do not have to think about because Germany, Japan, and Australia recently have gone to national level solar panel installation program,
Mm-mm.
and they have lessons learned after that, and they have all failed.
Okay.
So, this is again where I'm coming from. Let's take a reality check for Malaysia. When we run programs now, or the government runs a program saying, let's go all out on solar panels, I'm like saying, wait a minute, I'm not saying spend money on R&D now. I'm saying spend money or time and just analyze the research that has already been done by these countries. Why is it that they couldn't succeed in large scale government funded solar projects? Why can't we learn from that? Why can't we put a bunch of researchers in Malaysia together and study that and come out with a report to the government to say, so here's three countries, they tried to do it, they subsidized it exactly like what we are doing as well, and they all failed. Now, here's why they failed, so that we don't take those mistakes and maybe we could course correct and maybe do it better, right? But we're not doing that. We're not looking at that. We're not looking at the data that's available. We're not looking at the research that's available. Um, Fundamentally, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert in this area. I just again, it's my own personal interest researching this. There's a similarity across all those countries, and when they fail because they didn't take cost into consideration, and
Mm.
that was the biggest issue. The most recent in Australia was because all the companies that started up to produce power energy producers in Australia, they guaranteed that the solar panels will last for 2 years. And
Mm.
after 2 years, they shut their company down. And at year three and year four, when solar panels started to fail, and they tried calling them up, they couldn't get them on the phone. And then when they called up the government said, "Oh, we're not liable for this," and all of that. And it took years. It took years for them to have to get another government to then fund the to fund another group of engineers to go and take and remove those faulty panels. So can you imagine? We have all this happening around us, but we're not learning from that. We're jumping head in to spend billions of our public money to move into this. So again, like I said, we've got our researchers as well. I mean, your focus, you talk to a lot of researchers, and I always like to tell researchers, open your eyes, look at this. The last part that I want to talk about and touch on is ESG reporting. And I think this is an extremely hot topic now. Bursa, even in Malaysia, has already made certain mandatory requirements for public listed companies. And we can see this trend happening from US and Europe, and it's growing now as well. I want to say, so again, I want to premise as well. I'm also a consultant with the Sustec Group, which is a sustainability consulting group. After I did my GPM certification from US on sustainability, so I'm part of this group that does consulting work with companies who are looking to actually design their ESG framework, their positioning, and even down to their reporting. And there's a trend that keeps happening now, Visha. You'll find that there's many software companies getting involved in this space, right? It's a climate tech is big now. It's a huge industry. And what I've understood after going through my courses and being part of an experienced team is that there's a very big difference from um, um, just having a software that you can tabulate certain things and produce a report, versus having someone that actually understands the ESG environment and can consult companies. And I'll tell you
Exactly.
why. And this is something that's not shared with most the public as well, because it's a consulting secret. So I'm going to
Right.
share this and kind of like expose this a little bit, right? So in this space, right, there's three levels. The first level is data capture. And in data capture, this is where you see all the software companies coming in, because the predominant requirement by Bursa is that you got to have your greenhouse gas emission calculations. And that's why software is good, because these are standardized information, plot in your numbers, get your report out and publish it, right? This is level one only. And I want
Okay.
to emphasize that that's only level one in the reporting scheme. Level
Mm-hmm.
two is that when you can actually take that baseline information and then sit with the stakeholders and the company and then say, let's do a gap analysis now. Let's see where we are, where we want to be, then we know the gap, and let's put it out on the table. Now, that's a level two that is not done by software, because you need someone who's competent to come in and lead those discussions. Now, when you have a gap analysis, you've already identified the gaps in terms of where you are, where you want
Mm-hmm.
to be. Then, what you need to do, which is a level three, is what do we need to do to actually make changes, and what steps do we take to get there, which is where you have your full sustainability assessment report. That's a massive report that includes level one, level two, and then the recommendations to a company. And for, I would say, larger SMEs, this is really going to be required now, because even though they are not required by Bursa to do it, it is something good for a company to do, because it literally you get to take stock of where you are and what you want to do. Um, and I want to emphasize that most companies think that if I have a software and I can produce a report, I'm safe. But the other thing that's happening is also that regulations change so frequently. We have the new European carbon border trade tax that's coming in, and a software can't adapt to changes in regulation, right? You need going to need someone to see whether is this going to impact my company? Is it going to impact our shareholders? And that's where it's different. So I want to just re-emphasize and just refocus that ESG reporting is not a software, it's not a formula. It's really a way of thinking. It's a way of living now in the company. It's a way of refocusing how we want to do business. And companies need to be aware of it, and researchers who want to get into this space need to think about it. And again, if your viewers are interested, I can always recommend where they can go for short courses as well to get some understanding of that. But that's roughly it. That's a reality check. In summary, basically, I would say, if you are getting into this space, or you're a researcher that's interested in this space, do your research in terms of the broader economics, the local domestic effects, and then start thinking really how you can add value from your research into companies or into the government as well to make recommendations, because this is something that we all need for us to move forward.
Okay, that's really nice because, David, I can totally relate when you talk about how green is green, right? When you're talking about solar, I personally have done some research on solar panels, and I've developed my LCOE, my LCA. I've done my LCA, and we talk about end life disposal. Oh my God, that's so relatable because that's where I'm struggling. When I've done some research to enhance the efficiency of solar panel, right? And then when I try to incorporate back in my TEA, my techno-economic analysis, I feel it's not worth it because it's not going to be so much helpful, even though I'm going to increase the efficiency. But what about the end life disposable? I'm adding on some materials to it. And then what about my end life management? And that's like what
Yeah.
you say. There's a lot of rare earth elements into it. And how are we going to manage that? And when you talk about the lifespan, 20 years, it's really 20 years? Yeah, so that's another question marks, right? And when you talk about ESG reporting, I just want to know how often do you need to do this reporting? Is it an annual thing that for them to, how often do they need to do it? The big
So
companies?
the question that my mentor in this space that has trained me to ask, which I'll ask you again, is why do you have a need to report? That's the first question, because if I'm a public listed company, I have to report because now it's mandatory, right? And then you've got to then ask what is mandatory, so that you know then that those are the areas that I have to report on, and then you report that. But if you have an organization that really has a mindset shift, right? I give you an example without mentioning names. So there was a company that was approached by our consulting group, and they wanted to do the full assessment, full sustainability assessment. It took 6 months. We had a team of experts that went in and kept on interviewing them, and we finished the report. You'll realize then later that they said the one of the main reasons why they did it wasn't just because they wanted to focus on green, but it was because they were going to list the company, and not even in Malaysia, they're going to list it in Singapore, right? Um,
Mm,
and this becomes a very smart business strategy, because they used a sustainability assessment, which was completely thorough, took 6 months to do, because they
mm,
knew that they were going to list the company and they wanted to have something really substantial. If you think about that from the perspective of all these different public listed prospectus that's prepared, it's 300, 400-page documents. But look at what happens to some of those companies. They list, they still have issues, they still have governance issues, they still have, a lot of non-transparency stuff. So this company is so forward thinking that they decided to do a full sustainability assessment because they were going to list. And that's my answer. My answer is kind of like, I know, vague, but it's really dependent on the company and why they want to prepare a report. I would break it up into those three areas again, Vita. One, whether you just want to have something that shows your greenhouse gas emissions and what you're putting out. Two,
mhm.
whether your company's share stakeholders want to take it further and do a gap analysis after that. And three, whether they're really forward thinking, they're saying, okay, now let's make changes across the board because we've done a gap analysis. So those are the three areas that a company or even an individual can think about reporting.
So that's interesting, like what you said, like the first stages.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you so much, David. I think whatever the inputs that we're given today, it's a lot to take in. I think that's
Yes.
really, really big for the
Yeah.
viewers or whoever's going to watch this, right? I think there's a lot of inputs for them to take on the reality check, especially. And I really love how green is green because
Yeah,
it's so
yeah. I mean, I could
simple.
talk for I can talk for hours on that and give you more examples, but it'll just be too boring. Yeah.
I mean, it's a different perspective, right? Because, like what you
Yes.
said,
Yes.
researchers are looking at a very different perspective, but they're not looking on this side, on this angle of
Yeah.
how I'm going to manage this. That's really a good point to highlight, actually. Thank you so much, David. And then, if it's given time, and then if this, let's see the interest from the audience, and let's talk about more. And I see that you're so knowledgeable into this, given that experience in this space. I mean, it's out of your personal interest as well, right? For the
Yes.
past 4 5
Yes.
years to the space. That's really interesting. So let's talk more on this. Thank you so much, David, for your time.
Thanks, Visha, for having me. And if we have more time, we can especially look at the grids. reliability, which we didn't touch on, and maybe we can talk about some of the startups that I'm talking to now, who is also in the energy sector, which has really interesting technology that's coming out. So these are
That
some
would be
interesting things that we could talk about. Yeah.
that would be interesting. I would love to let's just connect soon and let's talk about all these topics. Thank you
Thanks,
so much,
Nisha.
Julie, for sharing.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.